Admiral Zorax stood in the command center of the alien fleet, his eyes scanning the vast space ahead. The stars twinkled in the darkness, but his attention was focused on something far more important. In the heart of the fleet, deep inside a heavily guarded training facility, something unusual was happening. It was a rare event, an event that caught his interest. A young human child, barely old enough to be considered a soldier, had entered the virtual simulation room. Zorax had seen countless warriors from different species step into these simulations. They were elite fighters, each skilled in the art of war, each well-trained in the brutal realities of space combat. But this child, this human, was different. The Admiral had read reports of humans being aggressive, resourceful, and capable of surprising things, but he had never seen one in action. He had always thought of them as primitive, not capable of mastering the art of war like the other species in his fleet. Yet, here was this child, ready to take on a task that even seasoned warriors struggled with. The simulation was simple, at least on the surface. It was designed to test combat skills in space, with moving asteroids, enemy ships, and dangerous environments. But to pass, one needed to make the right decisions under pressure. It was not just a game. It was a test of reflexes, intellect, and tactical thinking. Zorax, along with the rest of the command staff, watched the young human's first moves with curiosity. At first, it seemed like the child was playing with little understanding. The first few minutes of the simulation were chaotic. The kid's ship swerved and jerked through space, narrowly avoiding asteroids that appeared out of nowhere. Zorax could almost hear the commanders laughing behind him. They expected the child to fail quickly. After all, how could a human child possibly have the skill to survive this? The aliens had been designing these simulations for years, making them increasingly difficult. They had seen hundreds of recruits fail. This human child had no chance, or so they thought. But something strange happened. As the simulation continued, the child began to adjust. Zorax could see the human's movements becoming more deliberate. The ship, once erratic and uncontrollable, now moved smoothly and with purpose. The child began to avoid asteroid fields with precision, calculating each move with an uncanny sense of timing. The Admiral's curiosity grew. This wasn't just luck. There was something more here. It wasn't the child's size or strength that made a difference. It was something else. Something Zorax couldn't quite understand. The simulation advanced, throwing more complex obstacles into the path of the young human. Enemy warships appeared on the screen, each larger and more powerful than anything the child had ever seen. These ships were armed with weapons that could destroy entire fleets with a single shot. But instead of panicking, the child's focus seemed to sharpen. The ship moved with expert precision, dodging enemy fire, and finding weak points in the alien ship's defenses. Zorax leaned forward, watching intently. He had expected the child to fail, but instead, the human was surviving. The kid wasn't just avoiding danger. They were thinking ahead, anticipating what the enemies would do next. It was as if the child had a deep understanding of the simulation structure, as if they were already thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. At one point, the child did something that Zorax found truly baffling. The young human pilot flew straight into the heart of an asteroid field, surrounded on all sides by huge rocks floating in space. It was a move that seemed reckless, even suicidal. The commanders watching from the side seemed to hold their breath, certain the child was about to be destroyed. But then, just as the ship seemed to be caught in the web of the floating asteroids, the human ship made an unexpected maneuver. The ship danced between the massive rocks, slipping through gaps so narrow that Zorax's own fleet's best pilots would have hesitated to attempt it. It was as if the child had mastered the art of flying, understanding every rock and every danger in the field. The simulation grew more intense. More alien ships appeared, and the child's ship was surrounded. Zorax could feel his anticipation rising. This was it. The end of the game was near. The child's ship was outnumbered, and it seemed impossible for anyone, especially a human child, to survive this last wave of enemies. But the kid didn't give up. Instead, the ship seemed to find a new level of focus. The human's fingers danced across the controls, inputting commands faster than the alien commanders could follow. The ship's weapons fired with deadly accuracy, taking down enemy ships one by one. It was then that Zorax realized something shocking. The human wasn't just playing the game. The child was mastering it. It was almost as if the simulation had become a puzzle, and the human was solving it. The moves, once seemingly random, were now part of a greater strategy. The child was using their enemies' mistakes against them, exploiting weaknesses in the simulation that no one had expected. By the time the final wave of enemies was defeated, the child had not only survived, but had completely outclassed the entire simulation. Zorax sat back in his chair stunned. He had never seen anything like it. A human child, someone who should have been nowhere near the level of the elite warriors in his fleet, had just conquered the simulation. The Admiral couldn't stop his mind from racing. How was this possible? What was it about this child that made them so different? For a moment, there was silence in the command center. The other commanders exchanged confused looks. Some were whispering to each other, still processing what they had just witnessed. Zorax, however, was deep in thought. The simulation had been designed to push even the most experienced warriors to their limits, and yet this human child had succeeded where many others had failed. Zorax couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something critical about this human's potential. The simulation screen went dark, and the child's figure appeared in the center of the room. The kid stood there, a small, unimpressive figure compared to the towering alien soldiers around them. But there was something in the child's eyes, a glint of confidence, of understanding, that made Zorax feel uneasy. The human hadn't just completed the simulation. They had understood it in a way no one else had. As the child walked out of the room, Zorax stayed in his seat, staring at the empty screen. He couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. This human child had just proven something that no one in the fleet had believed possible. Perhaps humans were not as weak and primitive as the Admiral had always thought. Perhaps in some way, they were more dangerous than anyone could imagine. The seed of doubt had been planted in Zorax's mind. What was it that made humans capable of such feats? Was this just a fluke, or was there something deeper at play? He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed the beginning of something much bigger than anyone could predict. And so, as Zorax turned to the rest of his command staff, he knew that this was only the beginning. The humans were more than just an interesting species. They were a threat, one he had underestimated. And now he would have to discover just how deep that threat ran. As Admiral Zorax sat back in his chair, still processing the events he had just witnessed, his mind raced with questions. The human child had defied every expectation, every assumption the Admiral had about humanity. This wasn't just a fluke. There was something more, something beyond the reach of the simulation that had allowed this child to succeed where seasoned warriors had failed. How had a human with so little experience mastered such a complex and dangerous simulation? What was it about them that made them so different? Zorax quickly ordered his officers to gather the simulation data. They would run the analysis immediately. The child's actions needed to be studied, dissected. It was clear that the human had done something that wasn't just about luck or reflexes. There was a method behind every move, every calculated risk. The Admiral couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something monumental, something that could change everything. The simulation had been one of the most challenging ones ever created. It was designed to test combat skills in the harshest conditions of space. It had been tailored to test the very limits of a soldier's abilities, and yet this human child had torn through it with ease. The rest of the fleet's commanders were still trying to understand what had happened. They'd seen the human survive in ways that no other species could. But the idea of a human outsmarting the simulation was something none of them had ever considered. Humans were supposed to be the weak species, the ones that lacked the advanced technology and intelligence of the others. They had never been a real threat to the more advanced races in the galaxy, until now. Zorax's officers worked quickly, but even they couldn't figure out how the child had manipulated the simulation to their advantage. The results showed that the child's movements were not random but precisely calculated. Each step seemed to be part of a greater plan, a strategy so complex that even the most advanced AI systems couldn't replicate it. It was as if the child knew the simulation better than anyone who had created it. But how? The human's mind must have been operating on a level Zorax had never encountered. He couldn't dismiss the possibility that the child had some hidden gift, something that set them apart from other humans. It was clear that the child had tapped into something that no one had anticipated. Zorax was no stranger to strategy. He had spent years studying the greatest minds in the galaxy. But what he had just witnessed defied all logic and understanding. There was a part of him that wanted to believe the human's victory was a mere fluke, but deep down, Zorax knew that wasn't the case. The child had done something the Admiral couldn't explain, something that no one in the fleet could have predicted. The victory wasn't just about surviving the simulation, it was about understanding it in a way that no one else could. With every passing moment, Zorax became more intrigued. There was a spark of something within this human child, something that made them different from the rest of their species. He had seen humans in action before, but never like this. The child's ability to read the simulation, to predict the movements of enemy ships, and use the environment to their advantage, suggested a level of intelligence that was far beyond the capabilities of normal humans. As the Admiral paced back and forth in his quarters, he couldn't help but wonder, what was the true potential of humanity? He had always viewed them as a lesser species, not capable of the kinds of advanced warfare tactics and strategies that the galaxy's greatest minds had mastered. But after seeing what this child could do, he began to question everything he thought he knew about them. Could this be the beginning of a new era for humans? Were they capable of something far greater than anyone had realized? Zorax knew one thing for certain. This human child was a puzzle, and he needed to figure it out. He ordered his officers to dig deeper into the child's background. Who were they? Where did they come from? How had they acquired such an advanced understanding of the simulation? There had to be an explanation, and Zorax was determined to find it. The days that followed were filled with analysis and investigation. Zorax's team combed through the child's personal records, but they found nothing unusual. There was no indication that the child had any special training or advanced knowledge. In fact, the child's background was relatively simple. They were from a small human colony, far from the political centers of the human world. They were a child, nothing more than an ordinary youngster who had somehow defied all expectations. The more Zorax looked into it, the more perplexed he became. There was no logical explanation for the child's behavior in the simulation. They had outsmarted the system in ways that seemed impossible. And yet there it was. The human had done it. It was then that Zorax realized something even more disturbing. If this child could manipulate the simulation so easily, what could they do with real combat? If humans were capable of this kind of intelligence and resourcefulness, then they were no longer the weak species the galaxy had believed them to be. Zorax felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The implications of what he had seen were far greater than just one child's victory in a simulation. If this human child was any indication, humanity might be capable of far more than anyone had anticipated. The Admiral knew he had to learn more. He had to understand the true extent of humanity's potential. Zorax had underestimated them once, but he wouldn't make that mistake again. He would be watching this child closely, studying their every move, and learning everything he could. The future of the galaxy could be shaped by the abilities of this one human, and Zorax intended to find out just how far those abilities went. As the Admiral stood in front of the simulation control panel, he made a decision. He would not stop until he had answers. The human child had shown him something that could change the entire course of galactic history, and Zorax intended to uncover the truth. no matter the cost. The days that followed Admiral Zorax's shocking discovery about the human child were filled with intense focus and investigation. Zorax had ordered his officers to dive deep into every piece of information they could gather on the child. The child's extraordinary performance in the simulation had raised too many questions that needed answers. It was clear that what Zorax had witnessed wasn't some random stroke of luck. It was something more, something far more advanced than what anyone had ever expected from a human. Zorax's team worked tirelessly, pulling up data on the child's background. They searched through every record, every bit of intelligence, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain the child's incredible abilities. But the deeper they dug, the more confused they became. There was nothing special about the child's origins. No record of advanced training, no indication of any exceptional intelligence or remarkable abilities. In fact, the child came from a humble, small colony on Earth, far from the heart of any major human city. They were just a regular human kid, from a world that Zorax had always considered weak, primitive, and unsophisticated. The more they investigated, the stranger it all became. The child's personal history was ordinary. Nothing suggested that they should have been able to outsmart the galaxy's best war simulations. There was no sign of any advanced training or knowledge. The child was simply an ordinary human, yet they had shown abilities that defied belief. The most troubling thing, however, was that none of Zorax's officers, not even the most experienced experts in simulation design, could explain how the human child had manipulated the system. The simulation had been designed to be foolproof. It was built by some of the brightest minds from the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. And yet, here was this human child, barely able to control their own ship, mastering the entire system in ways that seemed impossible. Zorax's mind raced. What did this mean? If this human child could break through the simulation's defenses so easily, what other kinds of abilities could they possess? Zorax had watched humans closely before, but never had he seen one display such potential. What did this child represent? Was this just a unique case, or was there something more about humans as a whole that he had overlooked? There was another theory that Zorax couldn't shake off. What if humans, in their seemingly primitive state, had untapped abilities that could change the balance of power in the galaxy? Could there be something about them that the other species, including his own, had failed to understand? It was possible that humanity possessed a hidden depth of intelligence and creativity, one that had been largely ignored by the more advanced species. This child was a symbol of that possibility, a glimpse into the future. As the Admiral pondered the implications of this discovery, a decision began to form in his mind. He needed to see the child again. He needed to understand how they were able to achieve such feats, and whether this was just the beginning of something even bigger. If the child had this kind of potential, what did that mean for the future of the galaxy? Zorax couldn't ignore the fact that humanity might be far more dangerous than anyone had believed. Zorax arranged to meet the human child in person. He was determined to speak with them, to learn more about how they had approached the simulation. There had to be something, some method, that the child was using to accomplish the impossible. It was risky, of course. Humans were known to be unpredictable, and this child had already shown that they could surprise even the most experienced alien minds. But Zorax's curiosity and desire for answers outweighed any fear. This wasn't just about a child mastering a simulation. It was about understanding a force that could reshape the galaxy. The meeting took place in one of the fleet's briefing rooms. The child entered the room, looking small and out of place in the midst of towering alien officers. Zorax stood at the front, his eyes fixed on the human. The child, with their bright eyes and curious expression, seemed unaware of the weight of the situation. To them, this was just another encounter. But to Zorax, this was a pivotal moment. The answers he was searching for could lie in this conversation. So, Zorax began, his voice calm but commanding. How did you do it? How did you master the simulation when no one else could? The child tilted their head slightly, as though trying to understand the question. I just played it, they said, their voice light and confident. I didn't think it was that hard. I just kept going. Zorax's brow furrowed. You just kept going, he repeated. It didn't make sense. No one else had been able to just keep going. The simulation was designed to challenge every instinct and skill a soldier had. Yet this child, with seemingly no effort, had excelled. The child shrugged. I guess I thought about the game differently. I wasn't just trying to survive. I tried to understand it. The more I played, the more I saw patterns, like it was a puzzle. I just had to figure out the pieces. Zorax stood silent for a moment, absorbing the child's words. The simplicity of their explanation hit him harder than anything else. It wasn't about surviving. It was about understanding. The child didn't view the simulation as a test or a challenge to overcome. They viewed it as a puzzle, something that could be solved through patience, observation, and strategy. It was this mindset, this ability to think differently, that had given the human child an advantage. Zorax realized that he had underestimated humanity in ways he couldn't even begin to count. The human child was not simply a master of the simulation. They had taken something complex and broken it down into something simple and solvable. They hadn't relied on brute force or speed. They had used their intelligence, their creativity, and their ability to adapt. It was this quality that made them so dangerous. What do you think you could do with this skill? Zorax asked, his voice low. Could you apply it to real combat? Could you outsmart an enemy fleet? The child thought for a moment before nodding. I think I could, they said. It's just like the game. If I can understand how the enemy thinks, how they move, then I can find a way to beat them. It's all about patterns. Zorax's heart skipped a beat. The child's confidence, their calm understanding of what was possible, sent a chill down his spine. If humans could approach warfare with this kind of mindset, they could become far more dangerous than anyone had ever predicted. For the first time, Zorax felt a deep sense of respect for the human species. He had always viewed them as weak and insignificant, but now he realized that there was something within them, something hidden, that made them far more formidable than anyone had imagined. As the child left the room, Zorax stood in silence, his thoughts consumed by the implications of what he had just learned. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. There was much more to humanity than met the eye, and he was determined to uncover every secret they held, no matter the cost. Admiral Zorax's mind was overwhelmed with new questions after meeting the human child. His thoughts spiraled as he returned to his quarters, pacing back and forth. The simplicity of the child's explanation about how they approached the simulation had left him shaken. Zorax had always believed that power came from strength, from technology, from overwhelming force. But this human child had demonstrated that intelligence and the ability to think differently could change the entire balance of power. Zorax had studied the greatest minds in the galaxy, watched countless warriors display their might, and yet no one had ever approached combat or challenges with the same mentality that this child had. It wasn't about brute strength or mastering weapons. It was about understanding, patience, and strategy. This child had seen the world in a way no one else had, and that was what made them dangerous. The child's words echoed in his mind. It's all about patterns. This, more than anything, had stuck with him. Zorax had always focused on tactics, understanding how to outmatch an enemy through sheer force or superior technology. But the human child had approached it as if they were solving a puzzle, viewing their surroundings and the threats not as obstacles, but as something that could be understood and predicted. It was a different kind of warfare, a mental warfare that Zorax had never fully considered before. Could all humans think this way? Zorax wondered. Or was the child an anomaly? If humans were all capable of thinking in patterns, then they could become a formidable force, not through advanced technology or superior weapons, but through the sheer power of their minds. Zorax decided that he needed to observe more humans, learn about their potential. The one child was impressive, but perhaps there were others who had developed this same ability. If there was something about humans that allowed them to think like this, to adapt and outsmart others in ways that others couldn't anticipate, then that could change everything. With a sense of urgency, Zorax summoned his fleet's intelligence officers. He ordered them to gather data on human combat strategies, on the tactics they employed during real battles and simulations. He wanted to see if this child was just one exception, or if there was a deeper, more widespread trait among humans that allowed them to manipulate situations with such ease. It would take time, but Zorax was certain that the answer lay within the humans themselves. As the days went by, Zorax found himself returning to the simulation data, studying it again and again. The child's movements were more than just random decisions. They were deliberate, thoughtful, and calculated. The way they had navigated the asteroid fields, the way they had anticipated the movements of enemy ships, it was all part of a larger strategy. They had made their decisions not in the heat of the moment, but as part of an ongoing thought process that took the entire situation into account. The child wasn't just reacting to threats, they were planning for the future, for every possible move the enemy could make. It was almost as if the child was playing the game several steps ahead, predicting outcomes and adjusting to each challenge as it appeared. As Zorax examined the data, a sudden realization hit him. The simulation hadn't been a test of strength, or skill, or even technology. It had been a test of adaptability. And the human child had passed it with flying colors. They hadn't needed to overpower the system. They had simply outthought it. The Admiral felt a twinge of unease. What if humanity was more adaptable than any of the galaxy's other species? What if this adaptability made them merely impossible to defeat? Zorax knew that his next move had to be calculated. If the humans were capable of adapting like this, if they could think their way out of any challenge, then they could become the greatest threat to his fleet and to the galaxy. But Zorax wasn't one to act without preparation. He would need to test this new hypothesis, push the boundaries, and see just how deep this ability ran. His next plan was risky, but it would give him the answers he sought. He ordered his officers to set up a more advanced, more unpredictable simulation, a test that would challenge not just the child, but any human who dared to face it. This time, the stakes would be higher, and the challenges would be far greater. Zorax wanted to see how well the child's adaptability could truly hold up against the full force of his fleet's technology. But before he could proceed, he received a new set of reports that sent a shiver down his spine. The reports came from his fleet's scouts, who had been monitoring human space. The humans had been advancing quickly, developing new technologies at an alarming rate. Their military capabilities were expanding faster than anyone had anticipated. The scouts had detected new weapon systems being developed on Earth, and there were even rumors of humans working on advanced spacefaring ships, capable of traveling beyond their home planet. It was clear that humanity was on the brink of something bigger, something more dangerous. The implications were staggering. Zorax had believed that humanity would always be a minor player in the galactic stage. He had believed that they would never pose a serious threat to the more advanced species in the galaxy. But now, with this new information, he was beginning to realize that humans might be far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. If they were advancing this quickly, if they were developing new weapons and technology at such an unprecedented rate, then it was only a matter of time before they became a force to be reckoned with. Zorax sat in his quarters late one evening, pondering what all of this meant. The child's performance in the simulation had been nothing short of extraordinary. But now, with the information coming from human space, Zorax knew that this was just the beginning. Humanity was about to enter a new phase of growth, one that would put them on a level with the most powerful species in the galaxy. The Admiral's hands clenched into fists as he realized the truth. The humans were no longer the weak, primitive species he had once believed them to be. They were growing, evolving, and learning at a rapid pace. If they continued on this path, they would soon surpass the galaxy's most advanced races. Zorax understood one thing now more than ever before. He could no longer underestimate humanity. The future of the galaxy would depend on how the humans were handled, and Zorax wasn't about to let them become a threat. But he needed to act fast. The humans had already shown their potential, and if they kept growing at this rate, they would soon be a force that could not be ignored. With a heavy heart and a new sense of urgency, Zorax made a decision. He would watch humanity closely, study them, and learn their weaknesses. But more importantly, he would prepare for the day when humanity was no longer a minor player in the galaxy. That day was coming, and Zorax would be ready. As the weeks passed, the tension within Admiral Zorax's fleet grew. He couldn't shake the feeling that humanity was on the verge of something monumental. His observations of the human child's actions had changed everything for him. No longer could he dismiss them as a weak, insignificant species. Humans were growing more capable by the day, and the implications were becoming impossible to ignore. Zorax had increased the pressure on his officers to gather more intelligence. He ordered that every human fleet movement, every new technological development, be tracked. The reports from human space had confirmed his fears. They were advancing faster than anyone had expected. But Zorax wasn't ready to believe it all just yet. He needed more proof. He needed to see just how far this adaptability and intelligence extended across the human race. He returned to the simulation data, poring over the results. He had ordered another round of tests, more complex, more unpredictable than before. This time, he wanted to challenge the child again, to see if they could replicate their previous success, or if it had been a lucky fluke. But as the new simulations ran, something started to shift. The child had returned to the simulation without hesitation. They hadn't needed to be told what to do or how to proceed. They simply dove in, as if they knew exactly what to expect. It was clear now. This was no fluke. The child had a mind that could process these challenges in ways no other species could. The new tests were more advanced, designed to push every human strategy to its breaking point. But again, the child adapted. They saw patterns where others saw chaos. They reacted quickly, not with panic or fear, but with the calmness of someone who understood how to control the battlefield. Zorax's officers were stunned. No matter what they threw at the child, no matter how complex or overwhelming, the human child adapted. The child was changing the game again, not by overpowering the system, but by thinking through it, outsmarting it at every turn. It was then that Zorax had another realization. This child, and likely many others like them, had something that the rest of the galaxy did not possess. It wasn't just intelligence, it was adaptability. Humans could learn faster than any of the galaxy's most advanced species. They could evolve, improvise, and react to challenges in ways that no one else could anticipate. And in the context of war, that kind of adaptability was lethal. The thought sent a shiver down Zorax's spine. If humanity could adapt this quickly to the war simulations, how fast would they learn to outthink real opponents? How quickly could they overcome technological or military advantages by simply thinking outside the box? The child had already shown that they could defeat tactics that the greatest strategists of the galaxy relied on. And Zorax was beginning to fear that, if left unchecked, humanity could soon become a force that no one could control. He convened with his highest-ranking officers, and they began discussing their options. The topic was delicate, but necessary. Humanity was becoming more of a concern with every passing day. If they continued on their current trajectory, they could soon dominate the galaxy. The question was no longer if humanity would become a threat. It was when. And Zorax had to ensure his fleet was prepared. But even as he prepared for the worst, Zorax couldn't help but feel a strange respect for humanity. The very qualities that made them dangerous also made them fascinating. The human ability to overcome limitations, to push beyond the boundaries of what was thought possible, was something that the other races in the galaxy lacked. Zorax couldn't help but wonder if, deep down, he was witnessing the birth of a new kind of power in the galaxy. A power that wasn't based on brute force or advanced weaponry, but on intelligence, creativity, and resilience. It was then that Zorax decided that he would meet with the human child once more. He needed to understand how deep this ability to adapt ran. Was it unique to this one child, or was it something inherent to all humans? He had to know if humanity, as a whole, had the same potential. The meeting took place in a much more subdued atmosphere than the last. Zorax greeted the child with a mix of curiosity and caution. The child looked different now, more confident, more aware of the situation. Zorax could see it in their eyes. They had recognized the gravity of the moment. The child wasn't just playing games anymore. They understood that what they had done was important, and Zorax needed to know just how far that understanding went. "Do you know why I brought you here?" Zorax asked, his voice steady. The child nodded, their gaze unwavering. "You want to know more. You want to know how I did it, how I beat the simulation." "Yes," Zorax replied. "But I'm not just asking about the simulation. I need to know how you think, how you approached it. What did you see that made you succeed when others failed?" The child thought for a moment before speaking. "I guess I saw it as a challenge, not a test. I didn't see the simulation as something I had to win. I saw it as something I had to understand. The more I played, the more I realized that it wasn't about strength. It was about learning. Each time I failed, I learned something new. It was like a puzzle, and when I saw the pieces fall into place, it became easy to beat it." Zorax studied the child, trying to digest their words. It was clear that the child had an understanding that no one in his fleet could comprehend. Their ability to view the simulation not as a challenge to overcome, but as a problem to solve, was a mindset that Zorax could never have imagined in a human. It was as though the child had unlocked a level of thinking that surpassed what even the greatest strategists in the galaxy had achieved. "Do you think this way about everything?" Zorax asked quietly. The child nodded again. "Yeah, everything's a challenge, something to figure out. Not just in simulations, but in real life too. The more you learn, the more you can do. And the faster you can think, the better you'll be." Zorax took a deep breath. The child's words struck him like a lightning bolt. This was the heart of it, the secret to humanity's potential. It wasn't just their adaptability or their intelligence. It was their constant drive to learn, to evolve. It was their unshakable belief that they could always improve, no matter the circumstances. And now, Zorax understood. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their technology or their weapons. It was in their ability to adapt, to think in ways that no one else could. If humanity could harness this power on a larger scale, then the galaxy would be irrevocably changed. For the first time, Zorax truly understood what he was up against. Humanity was no longer just a species to be underestimated. They were the future, and Zorax knew that he had a choice. He could either learn from them, or he could face the consequences of underestimating them once again. He made his decision. Humanity had earned his respect, but the galaxy was his responsibility, and Zorax couldn't afford to be caught off guard. He would continue to watch, to study, and to prepare. Because one thing was certain. Humanity had already begun to change the rules of the game, and Zorax would make sure he was ready for whatever came next.